Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK, and today we're talking about pay gaps in PR. This week we launched the 5th edition of the groundbreaking Pay Gaps report from PRWeek and People Like Us, which asks PR firms to publicly disclose their gender and ethnicity pay gaps. You can see the details at prweek.co.uk, but briefly, on the plus side, arguably, there has certainly been record participation this year. 48 agencies have taken part, up from 41 last year. There are more big agencies too. 5 employ more than 100 people each. Last year, just 2 did. The overall ethnicity pay gap did narrow slightly, although it's still very high. On average, 21.9%. The proportion of senior roles held by ethnic minority employees crept up, which might partly explain the slight narrowing of the gap. Meanwhile, women on average were paid 2.9% lower than the average across the agencies. It's obviously a much smaller gap, but it has widened slightly in recent years. I should point out that none of the network agencies from the big listed holding groups have taken part. I'm sure we'll talk about that during the podcast. So, enough from me. To discuss the findings, we have People Like Us co-founder Sheeraz Gulsher. Hi Sheeraz, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me, John.
Pleasure as always. Our other guests head up 2 of this year's participating agencies, Heather Blundell, UK CEO at Grayling, and Pam Scobbie, co-founder and CCO of John Doe. Welcome both. Hope you're having a nice week.
We sure are. Nice to be here. Thanks for asking.
Good. Thank you for being here. And Heather, you well?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So I'm going to go straight into questions. First one's just generally about how you feel about the findings overall. Are you happy with the progress? Do you think the industry has some way to go? Are you sort of frustrated by this, or is it a kind of mix? What do you think, Sheeraz, first of all?
So I suppose the news for me comes at a very welcome time. The UK is probably the most polarised I've ever experienced it. There's rising xenophobia. UK political parties are seemingly borrowing from the Trump playbook, and media narrative on minority groups is growing more divisive and more dangerous from my point of view. And early this year we saw, I suppose, quite high-profile departures from diversity and inclusion for multinationals as a result of direct attacks from the Trump administration. I've kind of been wondering, what does this mean for the UK? And thankfully, we've been pretty steadfast. But I have to say this response from the UK PR industry is a statement that there is a place for diversity, equity and inclusion, that holding ourselves to account publicly is important to the very best leaders in our industry, 2 of which are in the studio, to their teams and their clients. And I think there's lots of positives to take from it. We've had our record number of entries to date. Gender pay gaps are remaining fairly steady, and ethnicity is a slightly more nuanced picture. I look forward to chatting through that a bit later on. And yeah, the thing you mentioned in your intro, John, is that no large network agencies have thrown their hat in the ring, and that is despite legislation on its way. And they are the ones that are going to be legally bound soon enough to report. So perhaps that's the elephant in the room. But overall, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I'm feeling pretty positive in this year's findings.
Good. Pam, what do you think?
I feel like I'm going to be the doom and gloom to Sheeraz's optimism there. I think precisely because politically it's so worrying right now. I read the results and, great that we've got 48 agencies who are reporting transparently and really committed to closing the gap. But I just thought only 48 out of the entire industry, when I'm sure, you have your top 150 kind of rankings that come out. I don't know how many people submit.
Yeah, probably about 200, 220.
Okay, so that's extraordinary that we only have 48 agencies. And I guess I just thought, if not now, when? That we cannot now kind of chalk up a lack of participation to a lack of knowledge, a lack of ignorance. I'm sure there are a great deal of those agencies that submit for the top 150 who have their values written on their website, who talk about, DEI. Where are you? It doesn't need to be, and I know we're going to go on to talk about our own kind of personal, approach to this, but it doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be a commitment. And I really believe if you're not in the pay gap report, then your commitment has to be questioned.
Right. Interesting. Heather, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to be even more doom and gloom than that. I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I also completely agree with everything you're saying, Sheeraz. And I think it's so important. And the work that you and people like us have led throughout our industry is such a positive endorsement of what can be achieved. But I completely agree with you. And Grayling was one of the only top 20 agency that's listed in the 150 that has participated in this. And I'm sure many would say, well, we're restricted from giving that data. But again,
that's nonsense.
Are they restricted from giving their data when we're all scrambling to make it up your 150 league table, as we all do? So the restrictions, they'll find a way of getting the data to you then. And I think it's even a step further than that. Lots of these big agencies, actually, DEI is at the heart of what they do in the UK, and they win awards for it. Yet, where's the data? Of course it's positive, and it's good that we are seeing gaps closing, but your question, is this positive progress for the industry? Who knows?
To your point on the top 150, I took a look at the number of employees in the top 5 agencies that are in the top 150, and there are more employees there than in the whole of the pay gap report. For 46, 48 agencies.
So how can we comment on the
exactly? And I think if those businesses maintain a kind of closed shop approach, then actually what I really fear is, going back to Sheeraz's point at the beginning of this, is like the political climate is really impacting leadership in a way in which people are feeling like this is potentially an optional extra now. And if it's a closed shop and we can't see what's going on, then actually what is the kind of the state of the nation within those organisations?
Well, it's a fair point. Is there any sense that actually, given the political climate at the moment, at least the number has increased, at least there is some progress? And actually, what we notice is there are quite a lot of smaller agencies and newer agencies that have taken part for the first time, and quite new agencies have been in it for 2 or 3 years now, which I think is quite positive. So is there a sense that maybe there's a sort of a new generation that see this as an important step from the get-go? Does that give you any more cause for optimism? Or
I think there's a lot to feel positive about. With regards to this pay gap report, there are more agencies. I would like to think that those people who are starting agencies and coming up through the ranks are really living and breathing the values that are in their handbooks and on their websites. So I don't know. Yes, there are positives, but do I feel overwhelmingly positive about the report? I can't say that I do.
Fair enough. Looking at gender pay gaps, I mean, what do the findings show you about the biggest barriers there where it comes to true gender equality at agencies at the moment?
Yeah, I do think the last year have revealed that there are barriers to gender opportunities, certainly, and within leadership. So we've talked about, some concerns over the lack of transparency of the bigger companies, and certainly the top 20 of the 150. But I think this year we've also seen leadership upheaval that I don't think I've ever seen before in, my near 20 years within the PR industry. There's almost been leadership changes at every single one of certainly the top 15. And within the last year, certainly there have been a couple recently, but I could sit here and I won't do it. But there were 10 appointments between January and June of all those massive companies, and they were all senior male appointments, and they were big roles. And it got to the point, so I'm nearly 2 years in my role as UK CEO at Grayling, where I was looking at this announcement after announcement and after announcement thinking, I think I might have been the last senior female appointment. And as I said, there have been a couple more recently, but 1 or 2. And I think there were, as I said, certainly over 10 in that short space of time of all these big companies, and at UK CEO level, at EMEA level, at global leadership level. And all that does is signify to women that, if I work really, really, really hard, I might be able to get a managing director role or head of my team role. But the C-suite jobs and those leadership roles are now all going to men. And also, where are those senior women going? So I do think if you couple these together, and again, I don't want this to be all doom and gloom, but I'm quite passionate about it, is we have none of those companies reporting in the pay gap report, and 10 appointments in the space of 6 months where there's huge upheaval of all these big companies and all of those leadership positions going to men.
I mean, I have to say that I've noticed that trend as well, and I've been totally perplexed by it, because I think in an industry that's majority female, and for our organisation, we are majority female board, we're all female founders. I actually don't know what's happening. Is it that senior female women aren't going for these jobs as much? Are they lacking the confidence? I find that really hard to believe. And so is there an unconscious bias happening? What are the interview panels like? What are the interview processes like? Obviously we're talking about leadership of some significant companies here, and the issue here isn't landlocked to those levels. But I genuinely don't understand now even what to suggest. I was thinking long and hard before coming here today, because I think in years gone by, there was a job to do in terms of education, coming back into the workplace after having had children, flexible working. There were lots of things that would have enabled and encouraged actually women to stay within this industry. So most of us are practicing those things. So what is now preventing women from not only reaching those senior levels, but they're at every single level within the industry? The pay gap, yes, has shrunk, but it still exists. And so I'm kind of at a loss as to what to say now, because it feels like a choice.
It's a really interesting point, isn't it? I mean, do you think that maybe the more recent rollback of those kind of post-COVID flexible working initiatives might have had an impact here?
Not at that level, not the levels that we're talking about, not that real C-suite levels, I don't think so. And I would say over 50% of those appointments look to me to be internal appointments. A senior woman's left and has been replaced by... And lots of these men are my friends, and they're brilliant. And I am not saying these are not deserved appointments, because, you can work out the companies I'm talking about. You've written about it. We all know about them. I don't know all of them, but lots of them are brilliant individuals, and I've worked with them and I champion them. But it got to the point where it almost felt like we were being trolled. It was just announcement after announcement.
I think it's a keen observation, after having had a few years where it felt like we were consciously choosing to instill a bit more equality within the industry and equity indeed. It feels like that fabric is threading, it's getting a little frayed. And I hope this is just a moment in time, and we shouldn't really be taking anything from it.
What message would you give to those big holding companies, presumably, and the big agency groups where maybe this has happened? Have you got any sort of particular thing you'd like them to focus on?
Publish the pay gap report
Indeed.
would be the first thing. I don't want to make it just about kind of C-suite, because I think actually the issue probably is more keenly felt when you start to look at things like job share and, actually that kind of, middle management, the point at which women start to say, is it worthwhile me staying within this industry or not? Because I feel like there is a growing disparity between what I'm being paid and what my male colleagues are being paid. And, I'm very mindful that I'm saying this as a kind of white woman, that, you take that issue again and it's compounded exponentially if you're a woman of colour. And so I think really having, firstly, why are we still talking about whether there should be transparent pay bands? Our salary bands should be published in every single business. We should understand where we're going next, where our colleagues kind of sit, and that should feel like there's real rigour around that.
I mean, we did the research from the top 150 a few months ago, where we found that it was only about a quarter of agencies in the top 150 that had adverts on their website had the
they would actually say what their salary was going to be, which also I just think is crazy, So I think that lack of transparency is, and I don't want to be too damning, but I think that is representative of a lack of transparency that will be within the culture of those businesses as well, which I'm sure women and Black and minority ethnic employees are really feeling.
Right. And actually moving on to that point, I mean, let's talk about the sort of ethnicity pay gap that we saw. I mean, there are some signs of progress there, particularly ethnic minority employees moving to more senior roles. Sheeraz, how would you define the level of progress there? Do you think that shows that there is something positive happening, or do you think it's perhaps more of an anomaly, really?
Pay gaps are essentially representation gaps. So ethnic minority staff are earning 21.9% less on average. The good news is it was down last year from 26%, showing that it's heading in the right direction. And perhaps it's not too dissimilar to gender pay gap reporting, which was introduced in 2017. And there was a study this year from PRWeek that shows that gender pay gap reporting nationally, it's at its lowest it's ever been. Off the top of my head, I think it was 11.2%, and that's why we feel strongly that legislation is the way forward, and that's how companies will be held to account. We can track the data meaningfully across the UK workforce. I suppose the silver lining for me is the agencies that entered year on year, 26% improved their ethnicity pay gap scores, which shows the reporting is very helpful. But what I would say, out of those whose scores dropped, and I think often this can be attributed to more junior hires, so people that are hiring at more junior levels, naturally the pay averages are going to go down, so it may not give you the full picture. So I'd encourage everyone to check out the agency reports so you can see what everyone is doing. But actually, one of the most heartening things I saw in the report is a quarter of entrants are creating pathways to leadership for underrepresented groups. I think this directly addresses systemic issues that Heather and Pam are just talking about that have been holding back the industry for years. So I think as more analysis is published, one I'm really keen to see on is the breakdown by individual ethnicity, and because I think that'll be really telling on the fuller picture of our industry.
Yes, indeed. We got some of that breakdown that will be going live on PR Week later on this week. So it's worth taking a look at that, definitely. And I think you make a really good point that it is worth looking at the details here. And sometimes the overall figures can disguise a lot of other things going on. And a lot of agencies have been doing good things, I think, to try and close their pay gaps. So moving on to that topic, Heather and Pam, it would be good to get your view, firstly, assessing your own performance in the tables and maybe talking about what have been some of the most effective steps you've taken at your agencies recently to help close those gaps? Heather, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So, as I said, I've been in this role for nearly 2 years now. And I do think the main thing to say about this is you do have to be really quite intentional about it. And I passionately believe in it, A, because it's the right thing to do, and B, because we have such a diverse mix of clients. If we look at our top 10 clients at Grayling, from payments providers to Grinder to Birmingham Football Club, I have to have a diverse workforce. I can't put the same people on those accounts. So we have got such a diverse portfolio of clients. Therefore, I need to have a diverse team in order to make it work. Otherwise, the creative won't fly, the thinking won't fly. It won't be a good fit for the clients. So I have to have prioritization in terms of social mobility, ethnicity, gender, sexuality. So it's really, really important for a big agency with a diverse pool of clients that we have diversity within the mix. So we made it a real priority when I came on board 2 years ago. And we promote every quarter. So we review everyone's position and promotion and pay every quarter. And we literally do it line by line. So we sit there with the heads of team, with the finance team and the people team, and it takes a full day and we go through it line by line. And I think that is the main way you can do it in order to say, okay, this person has been at the bottom of this band, or, the men in this team are all this level, and this woman's paid this amount, we need to even this up. And you only catch those things when you're going through it and you're discussing performance. And we all know that we have a pot to work from within each quarter, so you need to be quite intentional and purposeful about that. So that's the sort of first thing that we've done. And that's a lot of admin and rigor and input from people that they know these individuals. But I hope that we've got the confidence of the team that we do that now. And we've reflected that in our pay bands, which we're transparent about with the team, and within it some pay rises and promotions in order to even it all out. And there's always work to be done, but I'm really proud of how we've done in the league table. We've scored 100 in terms of our gender pay gap. We've improved on our ethnicity pay gap. As Sheeraz said, it's such a helpful exercise, because if you look at our ethnicity pay gap, it's like a positive 14%. It's like, oh, brilliant. But actually, if you look at it level by level, we've got some work to do in the middle part of it. And I wouldn't probably have known that if we hadn't have done this exercise. So that will be my next job. And so we're only as good as the information that we have. And so I'm so pleased that we've done this, but I'm really pleased with how we've done. And I hope that our agency is pleased that we've entered as well. And it's something really positive to talk to our clients about in terms of us doing the right thing, and by our teams, and then hopefully by our clients as well.
Do you know what? I mean, I think you and I have really landed the point, submit your pay gap report, but I think it's not a stick to beat you with. It's exactly that. It's a tool to really analyse your performance. And if you are committed to making sure that there is equality within your business, you do need some sort of audit. And I really commend Sheeraz for introducing the report in the first place, and John for all the work that goes into actually making it happen. And I know it's an absolute beast of a report for you, John. But I know for us, we were delighted with our scores. We got 100 from a gender perspective, and we got 98 from an ethnicity perspective. However, I really am very keen that it doesn't sound as if this has been self-congratulatory. What that allowed us to do when we took a look at the 98, or the fact that, when we did the piece of analysis that we submitted, was that we didn't have a pay gap at a board level. We didn't have it middle level, but we did have it at junior level, and so that
obviously,
allowed us to.
We had at the middle level, yeah.
But that then gave us the insight to correct it, and then we did correct it.
Yeah, nice.
So I would like to think that if we were submitting our figures now, we would be 100 and 100. But that doesn't mean that we're perfect. So there are lots of things in which we need to do better on. And actually, the pay gap report coming out is always a topic of conversation within our organisation. I know that my team expect us to be in that report. They are looking for our rankings within that report. It's always a topic of conversation. We'll discuss with them, what we've done and what we're committed to do in the kind of the weeks and the months ahead. For example, something that, wouldn't be reflected in our scores is the fact that I think we've still got work to do to really grow our leadership numbers from an ethnicity perspective, because we have been really successful in introducing junior team members to our business, and actually we've got a whole programme called Unlocked, which is in the north, which has been phenomenally successful. But it's now our responsibility to grow, develop, accelerate all of our team right up through the ranks, and making sure that they are being given the additional support and making sure that they are maintaining that there is no pay gap at any level throughout the business. So, we're really pleased with how we performed, but I'm certainly not complacent.
Absolutely. Good stuff. So I thought I'd dig into some of the data that we found, some of the findings briefly. I won't bore you all with numbers, to look at some of the most popular steps that agencies across the project have been taken. So they were asked to tick a box about which steps they have taken. I recommend everyone taking a look. In general, we found that agencies are looking towards data-driven internal processes and analyses instead of relying on sort of general staff training and one-off initiatives. They're being more targeted, in other words, I found. Top of the list was line manager training on reviews and promotions processes, kind of links to what you're both saying, followed by analysing pay increases, promotions and bonuses to highlight bias. So quite a targeted, rigorous approach. Interestingly, among the steps that were less popular this year than in previous years include hiring a DEI specialist. Suggests to me maybe more work is being handled in-house. What do you make of these findings about the most popular steps? Did anything sort of surprise you that agencies are doing or aren't doing?
I was a little concerned about the decrease in bringing in DEI specialists, because I think, for example, have our own DEI board. It's made up of members of the team from every single level within the business. But we really need the people who are they're the vanguard of this, to be coming in and saying, actually, this is now best practice, or, these are some observations that are really going to make sure that because DEI is not a static topic. We need to continually be thinking to ourselves, how do we do our best by our people? And that is going to change, not even with every generation, it almost changes with every single year. So I think not having other DEI leaders to come in and give an objective perspective, and actually from a lived experience perspective, I can't talk about what it is like to be a non-white leader in my business. So it's really important that the non-white leaders in our business have other peers that they can draw from, so that they know that we are reflecting that in our policies and reflecting that in our day-to-day.
Absolutely. Heather, what are your thoughts?
I mean, let's be honest, I should imagine that is linked to budget. And, we know that the industry has, for a couple of years, has, had a hard time and budgets are squeezed, and we're probably all going through budgets setting for next year at the moment, and there is always that sort of line and that section and DEI partnerships, etc. But I do think, I completely agree with you. I think it's so important to work with companies like people like us, and we have partnerships with Creative Access and Creative Mentor Network and the Global Purpose Enterprise, because they are experts, and also a lot of where our sort of talent pool comes in. So this year we have mentored between all of those programs over 20 young people. Some of them are now working with us, so it's actually where a lot of our junior talent comes from. So, and then we have consultancy locked into that as well. So I do think it's really important. I do, however, also think there's an increase focused on what we can do within agencies ourselves. So we've got, I think, 4 or 5 ERGs, so employee resource groups across the business now. So the Women's Network, people of colour, parenting, LGBTQ+, and most of those ERGs have got sort of 30-40 members, and they've really influenced policy, and it's a real community, and there's a faith network. And when we see horrible attacks like last week, we can really see the ERGs, coming into their own, and that sort of real sort of authentic support from across the agency, rather than just, oh, we've got a partnership with X and we're mentoring these young people. And I'm never saying that it's, to tick boxes, because I think it's fundamentally and strategically very important. But I also think people want to just feel it's in our lifeblood as an agency. So I think you need to do both. And I do understand, even for a big agency, it's an investment, and it's, we have to sort of defend it through the budget process. But I can understand for sort of smaller and mid-sized agencies that is a real investment. But I do think that expertise is so important, especially as you say, we need to be able to, look around the room and say, actually, we are asking people with diversity in terms of their thought and lived experience.
Can I challenge that point, actually? Because you're absolutely right. Budgets are decreasing left, right and centre. We all need to be really... You don't need to tell me, I go through our overheads with a fine tooth comb, what are we spending on and how are we going to make our budgets work to their best advantage this year. However, I think for it to be on the decrease and for it to be absent with an increasing amount of businesses is worrying. For us to feel like we have the answers to what are still really prevalent DEI challenges and problems within our own walls, I think it's close-minded and I think it's short-termist. And I do worry that it smacks of hypocrisy. Ultimately, lots of this industry were flying the flag for DEI and really making it part of our kind of marketing plans just a couple of years ago. And so it's a fabric part of our business, or it's not. And if it's a fabric part of our business, then it doesn't just come from our employees. It's not their responsibility to tell us how to, be great DEI employers. I think that comes from an external perspective. I really feel passionately about that point.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are unfortunately almost out of time for this podcast. I did have one more question, though. I wanted to ask each of you, what one piece of advice would you give to industry employers listening this who want to be more inclusive and to close their pay gaps? Pam, would you like to go first?
Beyond for the 50th time saying just publish your pay gap stats. What advice would I give? I would say do it. I mean, ultimately, do the analysis to start off with. Okay, maybe for some reason you missed the deadline this year to take part, but you can do your own analysis. You can share that with your team, and then you can put steps in place to see how you're going to tackle whatever gap or inequity sits within your business. Share that with your team. One thing that I think that we really strive to be great at is every member of our team understands where we're at as a business, what we're trying to do. We talk about what we're failing at. We talk about what we are attempting. We talk about what we're really excelling at. And so I think actually having that clear communication, given that we're all comms agencies, should be a must, really. So if people want to do it, do it. But I think beyond that, my general message would be just own your position in the market. Full stop. If you don't really care about closing the pay gap, then own that too.
Good stuff. Heather?
I think to actually fundamentally admit that this actually isn't easy for a whole, we haven't even sort of scratched the surface here, but in terms of like the multitude of reasons why this isn't easy and why there are gender pay gaps and why there are ethnicity pay gaps. And I think, as you said, that's such good counsel. Just do it anyway and see where you land. If you rigorously review it every quarter, like we've spoken about, there should be no surprises when you come to submitting this report. But when you first get that data, and if you haven't been tracking it, I guarantee you it's probably quite shocking. And I think once you get that data and you think, oh my God, but we haven't got enough cash to sort it out, or the people or whatever, and you feel like it's an absolute uphill battle. And I can understand, and I have lived that over the last couple of years. But what I would say is that this does pay. And I can think of one massive client that we have won this year that we just wouldn't have won if we didn't take a stance on this. And we asked these questions about, I could sit in front and say, yeah, we've got a zero gender pay gap, and we had diversity of thought and experience in the room. We had people from across the UK, not just London, and that will be a game-changing account for us as a business. And so if we hadn't put the work in, we wouldn't have won an account like that. So this isn't just the right thing, but it is the right thing to do. But I do genuinely passionately believe that this will grow your revenue as well.
Great. And Sheeraz, final word. What advice would you give?
Common thread of feedback I get a lot, and it's something I experience, and I guarantee every listener to this podcast has experienced, is a bad reviews and promotions discussion. I remember I used to have this manager who was a lovely guy, and every time I'd rock up to his meetings with all my receipts and all ready to go, and this guy would rock up with a half-folded piece of paper in his back pocket. I'd be thinking, oh shit, here we go again. And I think it's upskilling staff on how to be good line managers, set really clear objectives that people can reach. I've seen so many great people over the years leave the industry because they felt disillusioned because they can't progress any further for reasons they don't understand. And the agencies that have done that exceptionally well have just standardized the way they do and measure people and their success and communicate to them very clearly how they get to the next parts of their careers. So it's really good that's been one of the top things that people are doing to close their pay gaps. And that would be the most time I would spend. And that's something you can do internally. But yeah, I mean, each of us have a role to play in making our industry fairer for all. And I highly recommend everyone, whether you took part or not, to check out the list of the top things agencies are doing to tackle pay gaps, because that resource is an absolute goldmine.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, that's all the time we have. Fantastic discussion. Thanks so much, Sheeraz, Pam, and Heather, for your insights and your time this week. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
You could read all about the Pay Gaps report on PRWeek.co.uk this week. And obviously, for as long as the website exists, which will be forever, I hope, I should say a big thanks to all the agencies that have taken part this year. So do take a look if you haven't already. Thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.